impetus for this project. As Dr. LaVoi noted, prior to coming to the University of Minnesota, I worked in college sports information. And when I was there, among many, many other things like announcing for sport teams and taking statistics down, I wrote bios and I wrote online coaching bios. One time, I remembered writing something along the lines of this: John Doe is single and resides in Edina. Now, it wasn't exactly like that, but it was something. It was something like that. And writing that text made me think, what kinds of text and frames are present or absent in online coaching bios? And it prompted us to create this project. Before I talk about the specifics of what we did, I want to build a little bit on what Dr. LaVoi set up and talk about some of the literature that framed our particular study. As noted, this research is an extension of sport media scholarship like Dr. Kane and Dr. Bicey. This scholarship has shown the consistent and routine trivialization and marginalization of female athletes in the media across mediums in print, broadcast, and in textual and photographic representations. This trivialization and marginalization, it can come in many forms, but something specific to our research is the documentation of how heteronormative, heterosexist, and homophobic narratives, and you guys can all try to say that 3 times fast at the end, marginalize and trivialize female athletes in sport media context. An example of this might be portraying an athlete as a mother and not a top performer. So that would be might be heteronormative. While there is a body of literature that has focused on athletes' portrayals in the media, far less attention has been given to coaches' representations in the media, despite the fact that the head coach is seen as the most visible position of power on sport teams. There is one recent example that I'll point you to, and that's Hardin and Whiteside in 2009, and they examined the media coverage and framing surrounding the lawsuit around Penn State women's basketball coach Renee Portland. So how many of you are familiar before I talk about Renee Portland? Hands? Yeah, okay. So in the 90s, Renee Portland became synonymous with homophobia because she had this ubiquitous team policy: no drugs, no alcohol, no drugs, no lesbians. And as a result of that policy and the dismissal and discrimination of one of her players from the team, a lawsuit was filed. So Hardin and Whiteside did a content analysis of the coverage of this lawsuit from the time it was filed to the time Portland resigned in March of 2007. These authors argued that denying homophobia as an issue in the news coverage was virtually impossible. However, the authors found that the coverage of Portland and the lawsuit did not engage in a significant discussion of the systematic and widespread problem of homophobia in sport, thus denying the problem and missing a critical window for coverage. The authors wrote that not a single stereotype was challenged in the coverage, all were left intact. The closet door remains shut for lesbians in sport. Hardin and Whiteside's research is, to our knowledge, the only piece of research that focuses on the media coverage of coaches. So this is, to me, a really resonant point for future research. So if anyone is looking for a project, the coaches are in a position of power, and yet there's a pretty robust amount of scholarship specifically on female athletes in media, but there is a gap in representation of coaches in the media. So while Hardin and Whiteside's research is seminal, it is limited as it concerns itself with just one coach, and it may not be extendable to the experiences and portrayals of other female coaches and as male coaches. Just as Dr. LaVoi noted, the work of Anderson and Griffin is pretty much considered seminal in this field for research, both in an anecdotal and empirical way. The authors use personal interviews, personal experiences, and case studies to show the negative consequences of homophobia in sport. However, neither of them touch on the tenuous relationship between coaches and the media, which is something that I'm going to talk about. So I just want to note, this research that we did in this project is unique in 3 ways and extends current scholarship. So first, it is a gendered analysis of coaches in the media, which we have said is rarely done, just one time to my knowledge. And also it incorporates male and female coaches into one study, which is also unique. As Dr. LaVoi noted, we tend to separate coaches and study one group at a time. Second, it's novel because it's in a new media. We took these from online sources. So extending the research from print broadcast to new media is important these days. And finally, this study is attempting to contribute and extend the previous research and interrogating how power and normative attitudes are reproduced and challenged in sport media. So.